Mary Hammond sat trembling on a wooden bench, her wrists tightly strapped. 5 Jamestown council members looked on as a man with a whip lashed her back. Blood dripped down, mixing with the dirt. A secretary read her sentence. Disobeying her husband and being with another man. Mary stayed silent. She knew screams only entertained the crowd. Onlookers cheered her punishment. Her crime was refusing to sleep with a husband who beat her. She had turned to a kind neighbor for safety and care. Captain John Smith, who witnessed the event, later wrote in his diary that women who didn't know their place caused trouble. By the time the whipping ended, Mary had passed out. She was taken back to the very man who had abused her. The next day, she was found dead, hanging in her home. Officials called it suicide, and no one questioned it. It was easier that way. In 1607, English colonists arrived in North America, starting with Jamestown near the James River. More settlements followed, bringing European ways to unfamiliar lands. But this civilization came with brutal traditions. In these small forts, surrounded by forests and native tribes, colonists recreated some of the worst parts of life back in England. Patriarchal laws became even more severe. Any disobedience, especially from women, was seen as dangerous to the colony's survival. Between 1607 and 1630, thousands came to Virginia, but most didn't make it. Hunger, illness, and attacks claimed many lives. Those who survived built a society where women had little value, less than a leaf of tobacco. Women were brought over as goods to be purchased. In 1619, a ship arrived with 90 women for unmarried men. Each was priced at 120 pounds of tobacco, costlier than enslaved Africans, but still cheaper than a good horse. By 1624, Virginia had 1 woman for every 4 men. You'd think this would give women more value, but it only made them targets. Women became property, fought over and controlled. Their future depended on violence, trade, or a handful of tobacco. Virginia Company records openly refer to them as cargo or breeding stock. Yet behind the paperwork were real women. In a small hut, Elizabeth Pierce baked bread with bloody hands. Her husband had beaten her the night before. She, like many wives, stayed silent. In the center of town, 14-year-old Ledden served food at a tavern. The men groped her openly. Her own father encouraged her to work there, hoping for a few extra coins. Near the eastern gate, Mary Holt, now a widow, collected wood. Her husband had died from illness, leaving behind debt. Creditors now demanded payment. Through her body, there were no other options. Janet Hopkins worked the tobacco fields. Just yesterday, she gave birth to her 5th stillborn child in 7 years. Her husband warned that if the next child didn't survive, he'd replace her. Near the church, Sarah Wilson was forced to kneel in public. Her offense? Questioning a pastor who claimed women were made only to serve men. For many, the New World turned out to be just another kind of prison. Colonial laws took away women's rights completely. A 1609 law stripped married women of the right to own property, sign contracts, or even raise their children. Women belonged first to their fathers, then to their husbands, and later to their oldest sons. Marriages were business deals. Fathers traded daughters for goods, land, or tobacco. The girl's opinion didn't matter. A nod from her father was enough. One Jamestown record shows 13-year-old Mary Stewart traded for 200 pounds of tobacco, with full expectations of being a wife and mother. Divorce was nearly impossible. Even if a husband beat his wife almost to death, she had to prove it in court, and women's words carried no weight. Men's statements were enough to decide her fate. Children legally belonged to the father. A mother couldn't stop punishments, forced labor, or unwanted marriages. One will even listed a wife and kids alongside livestock, all passed to a relative. Unmarried girls who arrived alone were placed in men's homes as helpers. Starting at age 12, they were seen as future wives. If a servant woman had a child with her master, she'd be whipped, and the baby became property of the household. Some women fought back, but harsh punishments waited for those who did. One was the iron bridle, a metal mask with spikes that pierced the tongue when speaking. It was used on women who talked back, questioned husbands, or simply raised their voices in church. These punishments happened in public. Women were stripped and masked in the town square. They couldn't speak or eat normally. People mocked them through things and poked them with sticks. Children were taught to obey by watching the pain of others. Tongues swelled. Wounds became infected. Some women lost their voices forever. Others died. Even after release, they had to kneel and beg for forgiveness. The fear of the mask kept others quiet. Oppression touched every part of a woman's life. Even their clothes were a kind of control. Heavy fabrics covered nearly everything, leaving only the face and hands exposed. Women weren't allowed to show their beauty. Their living spaces were right next to the male head of the house, so every move could be watched. Even everyday items, like dishes and tools, were used to shame or control. There was no privacy, no safety, and no fairness. Only survival in a world built against them. Women in colonial Jamestown ate from plain wooden bowls, while men used pewter plates. At shared meals, wives got whatever was left after men and boys ate. Even a young boy could grab food before his own mother. Food was often scarce, and women usually ended up with the smallest portions, the worst cuts of meat and sour milk. During the brutal winter of 1609, known as the Starving Time, colonists were pushed to extremes. They ate dogs, rats, snakes, even boiled leather from shoes. Evidence from Jamestown digs has confirmed something even darker: cannibalism. The remains of a 14-year-old girl, called Jane by researchers, showed signs of desperate butchering, suggesting people try to survive by eating human flesh. In such conditions, women weren't seen as people to protect. They were just another resource, even in death. A woman's workday began around 4 a.m., starting with milking cows in the wet, swampy air. By 5, she had to light the fire and make breakfast. An hour later, she was scrubbing floors, washing clothes in freezing water, or mending clothes. By 7, she was already in the fields, pulling weeds, harvesting crops, or hauling heavy loads. If she got a lunch break, it barely lasted 30 minutes. After that, more labor until sundown. Then she cooked dinner, cleaned again, and worked by torchlight sewing or repairing clothes. She went to bed last and got up first. Despite working 16 to 18 hours a day, much longer than men, women earned nothing. The law said everything a wife did belonged to her husband. Even money she might earn from selling goods went directly to him. Widows often worked even harder, taking multiple jobs like washing, sewing, and cleaning just to earn food and a place to sleep, often in a barn. Women were confined to domestic roles and judged harshly. Even with all they endured, they were still labeled as lazy. But the physical exhaustion was only part of the suffering. In their own homes, women were expected to meet what was called marital duty. That meant being available to their husbands at all times, no matter how sick, pregnant, or injured they were. Saying no was treated like cheating and could lead to a public beating. Men believed they had the legal right to demand sex. One diary from the time described a husband grabbing his wife by the hair and throwing her onto the bed, shouting that she was his property. Religious leaders supported this thinking, preaching that a woman's body existed for a man's use. If a wife resisted, she might be forced to apologize in front of her entire community. Even pregnancy didn't protect her. Some doctors claimed intimacy during pregnancy was healthy, even until the final days. 1 in 5 women died from abuse or infections linked to sexual violence. Servants and enslaved girls faced even worse. Young girls were sometimes beaten to death for refusing their masters. Some colonists disguised prostitution as temporary marriage. Shockingly, churches accepted it and even collected payments from it. Most women began having children around age 14 and gave birth every 2 years until about 40. If they lived that long, they'd experience around 13 pregnancies. Many didn't make it that far. Medical care for women barely existed. Male doctors often refused to treat female health issues. Midwives used herbs and prayers, but serious complications meant bloodletting, which usually made things worse. Nearly 60% of babies died before age 5. Mothers were often blamed for these losses, accused of being unfaithful or lacking belief in God. In the Jamestown colony, between 1607 and 1625, about 4,800 women arrived. Only 1,200 survived. On average, women lived to 37 years old, men to 45. Before girls were pulled into the cycle of labor and childbirth, they had to go through a humiliating ritual, a virginity test. Before marriage, girls were physically examined by a doctor in front of church elders and the groom's family. This happened in churches or clergy homes. The doctor would announce the result publicly. It was considered necessary to confirm the bride's purity. After the wedding, husbands laid down the rules for their new households. Women were expected to adapt quickly. Physical punishment for disobedience was allowed and even approved by society. A woman who spoke out or broke social rules could be punished in front of others. Once shamed, her status dropped even lower, making her even more vulnerable. But there were rare moments of change. In early 1625, a new governor, Sir Francis Wyatt, brought a royal order to ease the harsh treatment of women. For the first time, women could report abuse, appeal to courts, and even request divorce in extreme situations. Elizabeth Proctor was the first to act. Bruised and with a broken arm, she took her husband to court, accusing him of trying to kill her. Witnesses backed her up. Shockingly, the court granted her a divorce and compensation. For a few months, things started to shift. Women began to speak up, demanding fairness. Justice denied. Rights erased. Women still fight centuries later for safety, equality, dignity, and lasting change.